The energy vampire is not a modern metaphor. It is one of the oldest documented spiritual phenomena in the human record. 6 distinct ancient traditions: Egyptian, Vedic, Kabbalistic, Taoist, Amazonian, and Tibetan, developed frameworks for describing what the modern world calls the energy vampire. They used different vocabularies, developed different protective practices, operated in different cosmological contexts, and yet the description of the phenomenon itself is consistent across every one of them in ways that point not to cultural exchange or shared mythology, but to direct, independent observation of the same real thing. When traditions that had no contact with each other produce the same clinical description, the clinical description is accurate. This matters for more than theoretical reasons. The modern vocabulary for energy vampires, narcissistic supply, energetic drain, toxic relationships, is useful as far as it goes. But it does not go far enough. It describes the social and psychological mechanics without addressing the energetic and spiritual dimension that the ancient traditions all agree is real, is measurable in its effects, and requires specific intervention that the psychological vocabulary does not provide. The ancient traditions did not develop protective and healing protocols as supplementary additions to the social management of difficult relationships. They developed them as the primary response to a phenomenon they understood as primarily spiritual and energetic in nature. And they built those protocols with the specific practical effectiveness of traditions whose survival depended on getting this right.
I know what an energy vampire is from 5 years of sustained contact with one who escalated into something the modern vocabulary struggles to fully name. A coordinated stalking campaign run by a man and his own father, reaching my professional life, my family's orbit, and my body itself. Asthma, chronic fatigue, rehabilitation. The specific physical consequences of what every tradition in this video describes as the most serious downstream effect of sustained energy vampire targeting. The depletion of the fundamental vital reserve that animates the physical body, the disruption of the energetic channels through which life force circulates, and the accumulation of hostile energetic intrusions that the physical body eventually registers as clinical illness. I did not need the traditions to tell me it was real. My body told me. The traditions give me the map, the language, and the specific practices that the modern vocabulary cannot provide.
Today, we are going into the anatomy of the energy vampire as the ancient traditions describe it. 6 traditions. Each one adds a dimension the others do not fully cover. Together, they produce the most complete map of this phenomenon available in any framework. And from that map, we will build the specific healing and protection protocol that addresses what sustained energy vampire contact actually does to the body, the energy field, and the soul. Let's begin. The ancient Egyptian spiritual tradition distinguished between 2 primary aspects of the human soul, whose relationship is directly relevant to understanding the energy vampire mechanism. The Be is the personality soul, the individual's unique character, their voice, their presence, the quality that makes them specifically themselves. The Ka is the vital double, the energetic body that carries the life force and maintains the physical body's animation. The Ka was understood as requiring continuous nourishment from the divine source, from the Neteru, the divine principles that sustain all life, to remain healthy. When the Ka's connection to the divine source is intact, the person has genuine vitality, the specific quality of aliveness and presence that is not merely the absence of illness, but the positive expression of genuine vital force. The Egyptian texts describe specific entities called Sekhemu, powers or forces, that could attach to a person's Ka and draw it of its vital force. The Sekhemu were understood to operate sometimes through other human beings, people whose own connection to the divine source had been severed or severely weakened, who then turned compulsively toward the Ka force of others as a substitute for the divine source they could no longer access directly. The Egyptian understanding is precise on this point. The Sekhemu-bearing person does not necessarily choose to drain others. Their disconnection from the divine source makes them automatically and compulsively oriented toward the Ka force of those around them, in the same way that a person who has lost access to water will automatically orient toward any available liquid. The compulsion is constitutive. It is the natural expression of the disconnection.
The Egyptian diagnostic criteria for Sekhemu attachment are directly applicable to the experience of sustained energy vampire targeting. The specific quality of depletion after extended contact with a Sekhemu-bearing person is described in the Egyptian texts as distinct from ordinary physical tiredness. It runs deeper. It does not resolve with ordinary rest. It has a quality of reaching into the Ka itself rather than merely the physical body's surface resources. This is the quality of depletion I experienced in the period before I understood what was happening, before the mirror activated and the campaign began. The depletion that accumulated over months of contact. That was not tiredness. The Egyptian healers would have recognized it immediately, named it accurately, and prescribed the specific ritual interventions that their tradition developed for exactly this presentation. The Egyptian protective and healing practices for Sekhemu attachment involve specific prayers to the protective deities, particularly Sekhmet, the fierce lion goddess who is both the bringer of plague and its healer, and Horus, the principle of divine protection, combined with physical cleansing using water, natron, a naturally occurring salt compound, and incense. The water cleansing removes the accumulated Sekhemu energy from the Ka's outer layers. The natron absorbs and neutralizes the Sekhemu's energetic signature from the field. The incense establishes a vibrational frequency in the environment that is incompatible with the Sekhemu's continued attachment. And the prayers to the protective deities restore the Ka's direct connection to the divine source that was weakened by the Sekhemu's sustained drawing on it. These are not ceremonial gestures. They are specific, functional interventions on a real phenomenon.
The Vedic tradition's understanding of the energy vampire is built on the framework of Prana, the vital life force, and its most refined expression, Ojas, the fundamental vitality reserve that is both the foundation of physical immunity and the most direct indicator of a person's overall energetic health. The Vedic tradition describes prana as flowing through a system of subtle channels called nadis, and as being generated continuously through a person's alignment with the dharmic order, their genuine life purpose expressed authentically in the world. A person whose life is aligned with their dharma generates abundant prana. A person whose consciousness is oriented against the dharmic order through sustained deception, manipulation, and the false self's compulsive operation generates insufficient prana to sustain their own vitality and turns compulsively toward the prana of others as an external substitute. The Atharva Veda describes a specific category of subtle being called the Piśāca that subsists on the prana of living people. The Vedic texts are explicit that the Piśāca does not choose its parasitic orientation. It is constitutively unable to generate prana from the dharmic source because its fundamental misalignment with the dharmic order cuts it off from that source. The misalignment is the root condition. The prana extraction is the downstream consequence. In human terms, the person whose consciousness operates from the sustained generation of druj, the lie, the Zoroastrian framework's term for the anti-dharmic orientation, is constitutively unable to generate the prana that dharmic alignment produces and is therefore constitutively oriented toward external extraction. This is not moral judgment. It is the Vedic description of an energetic mechanism.
The depletion of Ojas that sustained Piśāca contact produces is the Vedic explanation for the specific physical consequences I experienced in year 3 and 4 of the campaign. Ojas is the last vital reserve to be depleted and the first to show the accumulation of its depletion in specific physical symptoms: immune fragility, respiratory weakness, fatigue disproportionate to exertion, cognitive fog, and the specific quality of not recovering to previous baseline after illness. These are the clinical signs of Ojas depletion, and they correspond exactly to the asthma, the chronic fatigue, the immune system's failure, and the extended rehabilitation that the campaign's sustained Piśāca targeting produced in my body over 5 years. The Vedic healing protocol for Ojas restoration is one of the most practically specific and most actionable healing protocols in any tradition. Ashwagandha root in warm milk or ghee before sleep for sustained HPA axis regulation and Ojas rebuilding. Shatavari for the female reproductive system's contribution to Ojas generation. Warm ghee in the diet as the most direct Ojas building food. Soaked almonds, dates, saffron. The Maha Mrityunjaya mantra, one of the most powerful mantras in the Vedic protective tradition, recited 108 times daily as both a protective practice against continued Piśāca contact and a specific healing intervention for Ojas depletion caused by it. And the pranayama practices, particularly Nadi Shodhana and Kumbhaka, that clear the Nadi channels through which prana circulates and strengthen the prana's own generative capacity to a level that makes external extraction more difficult. These practices are not supplementary. In the Vedic framework, they are the primary medicine for the specific illness that sustained Piśāca targeting produces.
The Kabbalistic tradition describes the energy vampire's attachment mechanism through the concept of the Dybbuk, an attaching entity that connects itself to a person's nefesh, the vital animal soul, and draws on the nefesh's resources in ways that progressively affect the ruach, the emotional and creative spirit, and ultimately the neshama, the divine soul. What distinguishes the Kabbalistic framework is its specific attention to the cord structures through which the attachment operates and the precise description of how those structures develop over the course of sustained contact. The Kabbalistic concept of Klipot Ha-Nefesh, the shells around the vital soul, describes the specific energetic structures that Klipothic attachment creates in the target's field over time. These are not the major Klipothic structures of the tree of Klipot. They are the smaller, more intimate cord-like structures that develop through sustained personal contact with a Klipothic consciousness. Each interaction that involves extraction, each moment when the energy vampire draws on the target's nefesh resources rather than genuinely giving to the encounter, deposits a small additional cord structure. Over weeks and months of sustained contact, these cord structures accumulate into a complex web that creates ongoing channels for continued extraction even after the primary contact has ended. This is why no contact does not immediately end the energetic drain. The cord structures that sustained contact developed continue to operate through the channels they established until they are specifically and deliberately severed.
The specific cord structures that 5 years of sustained energy vampire targeting created in my field, including the cords from the stalker, the father, every deployed flying monkey, every gossip network node that had established ongoing channels for hostile attention directed at my field, required sustained, specific, systematic cord-cutting work alongside the medical rehabilitation for the physical consequences. The medical treatment addressed the downstream physical manifestations of the cord structure's ongoing extraction. The cord cutting addressed the cord structures themselves. Both were necessary. The medical treatment without the cord cutting produced partial and temporary relief. The cord cutting alongside the medical treatment produced the cumulative improvement that eventually reached something approaching the restoration of baseline function. The Kabbalistic cord-cutting practice involves specific invocation of the divine names associated with protection and severing. El Shaddai, the All-Sufficient, whose power over the Klipothic forces is specifically described in the Psalms of Protection, and the specific verses of Psalm 91 that the Kabbalistic tradition understands as severing Klipothic cord attachments through the specific vibrational frequency of the Hebrew letters. The cord cutting is not a one-time ceremony. It is a regular practice that must match the regularity of the cord structure's continued generation as long as the energy vampires campaign is active. Weekly at minimum, daily during periods of escalation. The consistency of the practice is the mechanism of its effectiveness.
The Taoist tradition's framework of the three treasures, Jing, Qi, and Shen, provides the most precise description of the specific hierarchy of vital force depletion that sustained energy vampire targeting produces. Jing is the constitutional vital essence, the inherited life force that underlies all other vitality, and that is the most difficult to regenerate once depleted. Qi is the daily vital energy generated through breath, food, and harmonious living, renewable through ordinary healthy practices. Shen is the spirit, the highest expression of the three treasures, dependent on the health of Jing and Qi for its full expression. The Taoist understanding is that these three are depleted in a specific sequence by sustained energy vampire contact. Qi depletion occurs first and is relatively readily addressed through ordinary health practices. Jing depletion follows sustained Qi depletion and is substantially more serious, requiring specific and sustained restorative practice to address. And Shen disturbance, the spiritual and psychological fragmentation that Jing depletion eventually produces, is the most serious and longest-lasting consequence of sustained energy vampire targeting. The Taoist classical texts describe the phenomenon of Jing theft, the extraction of another person's constitutional vital essence through sustained, intimate contact with a consciousness oriented toward extraction, as one of the most serious categories of spiritual harm available in the Taoist framework. The specific symptoms of Jing depletion are documented with clinical precision. Premature aging effects in which the person's constitutional vitality diminishes faster than their chronological age predicts. Immune system failure, reproductive system disruption, the specific quality of not recovering to previous constitutional baseline after illness or rest, and a characteristic loss of what the Taoist tradition calls Jing Shen, the bright spirit quality of someone whose vital reserves are full and whose connection between Jing and Shen is intact. The asthma and the chronic fatigue and the specific quality of recovery below previous baseline that I experienced in rehabilitation. The Taoist physicians would have read this as a Jing depletion presentation consistent with sustained Jing theft over multiple years.
The Taoist Jing restoration protocol is among the most practically specific in any tradition, and I want to name it with precision because it is the dimension of the healing protocol that most people navigating the physical consequences of sustained energy vampire targeting have not yet encountered. He Shu Wu, Polygonum multiflorum. For kidney Jing restoration. This is one of the primary Jing tonifying herbs in classical Chinese medicine, used specifically for the recovery of constitutional vital force after depletion from sustained stress or energy extraction. Astragalus root for immune rebuilding from the constitutional level rather than the symptomatic level. The 8 brocades, Ba Duanjin. Qigong sequence performed daily as a Jing rebuilding practice. These specific movements are understood in the Taoist tradition to rebuild constitutional vital force from the foundational level through their specific activation of the energy pathways most directly associated with Jing storage and generation. And Zhan Zhuang, standing meditation, holding specific postures for sustained periods, which the Taoist tradition understands as one of the most powerful Jing building practices available because it cultivates the specific quality of stillness that Jing generation requires, and that the sustained hypervigilance of an active energy vampire campaign specifically prevents.
The Amazonian shamanic traditions of the Western Amazon, particularly among the Shipibo, Kabobo, Shuar, and related peoples, have developed the most operationally detailed understanding of what happens in the subtle body of a person under sustained energy. Vampire targeting of any tradition I have encountered. The Amazonian healers work with sacred plant medicines as diagnostic tools that allow the healer's consciousness to directly perceive the subtle structures of the patient's field, the cord attachments, the intrusive energies, the specific dimensions of soul loss, with a clarity and specificity that makes their descriptions unusually precise. The Amazonian framework distinguishes between the magical dart attack, the tsentsak, the deliberate sorcery-level intrusion directed by a trained Brujero with conscious intent to harm, and the semi-conscious targeting that a person with significant unresolved shadow generates through sustained, obsessive, hostile attention without formal sorcery training. The 5-year campaign I have been navigating falls into the second category. Not formal dark magic, but the accumulated force of sustained, obsessive, hostile attention from two people, stalker and father, directed at a single target over years. The Amazonian healers are explicit that this category of targeting, while different in its mechanism from formal sorcery, produces in the target's subtle body effects that are functionally similar and require similar intervention. The removal of the accumulated intrusive energy from the field, the restoration of the soul parts that have fragmented or departed in response to sustained attack, and the establishment of the specific protective boundaries that prevent the continued accumulation of hostile energy from the ongoing targeting.
The Amazonian diagnostic presentation for sustained energy vampire targeting is specific and directly applicable. The healers describe a characteristic constellation, disturbed sleep and recurrent nightmares in which the target experiences being pursued or drained. Specific physical sensations of heaviness, constriction, or pain in the locations corresponding to the major energetic centers most affected by the targeting. A quality of emotional flatness or reduced amplitude that the Amazonian tradition understands as soul loss, and a specific quality of not being fully present in one's own life that results from the combination of soul loss and the hypervigilance that sustained targeting produces. I experienced all of these before the physical symptoms reached clinical levels. I did not have the Amazonian framework to name what was happening. My body knew. The dreams knew. The Amazonian healing work for this presentation requires 2 distinct phases. The first phase is extraction, the removal of the accumulated intrusive energy from the field through the healer's Icaros. The specific sacred songs that are the primary healing tool of the Amazonian tradition and that function as precise energetic instruments for locating and removing specific hostile energetic structures. This is work for a trained practitioner. The second phase is soul retrieval, the calling back of the soul parts that have fragmented or departed in response to sustained attack. Both phases are necessary. Extraction without soul retrieval leaves the field cleared but depleted. Soul retrieval without extraction brings soul parts back into a field that still contains the intrusive energy that caused their departure.
The Tibetan Buddhist medical tradition, the Gyushi or Four Tantras, compiled in the 12th century but drawing on much older materials, provides the most therapeutically comprehensive framework for understanding illness arising from sustained energetic interference of any tradition in this video. The Gyushi distinguishes between illness arising from internal imbalances of the three humors, wind, bile, and phlegm, and illness arising from external spiritual causes, including what it calls Döns, malevolent influences, and Gongpo, obstacle spirits. The diagnostic criteria for illness in these categories are specific and clinically applicable. The Gyushi's diagnostic criteria for Döns and Gongpo illness are directly applicable to the presentation of sustained energy vampire targeting. The key diagnostic indicators: illness that does not respond to ordinary treatment, consistent with the apparent presenting diagnosis. Symptoms that arise in clusters corresponding to the patient's specific constitutional vulnerabilities rather than following ordinary disease patterns. A quality of health improvement when the patient is removed from the source of the energetic interference and relapse when contact is resumed. And the specific pattern of illness escalating during periods of increased hostile attention from the source, which in the context of an active campaign corresponds to periods of escalation in the flying monkey deployment, gossip network seeding, and direct smear campaign activity. All four of these diagnostic criteria were present in my presentation in years 3 and 4 of the campaign. The Tibetan physicians would have diagnosed Döns or Gongpo influence immediately and would have proceeded to the treatment protocol the Gyushi specifies for this category.
The Tibetan treatment protocol for Döns and Gongpo illness includes both accessible and initiation-restricted practices. The accessible practices: the medicine Buddha practice, which is one of the most powerful healing practices in the Tibetan tradition, and is specifically prescribed for illness arising from karmic and spiritual causes alongside physical ones. The Vajrasattva purification practice, which addresses the specific vulnerabilities that allowed the energetic interference to establish itself, and the recitation of the Kalachakra mantra as a protective field practice. The initiation-restricted practices involve specific Vajrayana rituals that require empowerment from a qualified lama, but that the Tibetan tradition specifically developed for exactly the category of illness that sustained energy vampire targeting produces.
Reading across all 6 traditions, the Integrated Healing and Protection Protocol for Sustained Energy Vampire Targeting has 3 tiers. The first tier is the daily foundational practice that all 6 traditions converge on, the renewal of the connection between your own vital force and its divine source. The Egyptian Ka's connection to the Neteru, the Vedic Prana's alignment with the Dharmic order, the Kabbalistic Ha-Nefesh's connection to the divine light, the Taoist Jing's cultivation through harmonious practice, the Amazonian spirit's connection to its plant allies, the Tibetan consciousness's refuge in the 3 jewels. Every tradition identifies the same root vulnerability. Disconnection from the divine source makes the vital force's external extraction possible. The daily renewal of that connection is the primary protection, non-negotiable, daily, specific in its invocation. The second tier is the regular clearing and cord-cutting practice that all 6 traditions identify as essential alongside the connection renewal. The Egyptian water and natron cleansing, the Vedic Nadi Shodhana that clears the pranic channels, the Kabbalistic cord-cutting with the divine names, the Taoist Qigong forms that move and refresh the Qi field, the Amazonian Saminchakui equivalent earth release practice, the Tibetan Vajrasattva purification, different forms, same function, the removal of accumulated extraction residue from the field before it reaches clinical levels in the physical body, weekly minimum, daily during active campaign escalation. This tier is maintenance. It is what the body did not have consistently enough in years 3 and 4 of my targeting. The asthma and the rehabilitation were the cost of insufficient second-tier practice. That cost is avoidable with consistent practice from the beginning. The third tier is the restorative work for when the accumulation has already reached clinical levels. The Ojas building Ayurvedic protocol, the Jing restoration Taoist herbs and Qigong, the soul retrieval and extraction work with a trained shamanic practitioner, the medicine Buddha, and Vajrasattva practices in their fuller forms. This tier is not daily maintenance. It is active restoration from damage that has already occurred. Both tiers 2 and 3 together, alongside the medical treatment that addresses the physical body's downstream manifestations, constitute the full healing protocol for the body that has already sent the bill. All 3 are necessary. None alone is sufficient. Let me close this video with a blessing rather than a call to action. Because the people who have found their way to this specific content have been through something that deserves to be met with something more than information and a subscribe button. May the Ka you carry be nourished from the Netaru, rather than drawn on by what cannot find its own nourishment. May the Prana in your nadis flow freely and fully, renewed daily from the dharmic source that no extraction can reach. May every cord that was established without your consent be severed cleanly, completely, and permanently, and the field left clear and sovereign. May the Jing that was depleted be rebuilt steadily in the deep stillness that Jing requires and that you deserve to inhabit. May the soul parts that departed find their way back to you, one by one, as the field becomes safe enough to hold them again. And may the Döns and Gongpo that reached you through the sustained hostile attention of people who could not generate their own vitality be removed from your field by the skilled hands of whoever the tradition sends you.
The Patreon is in the description for the specific practices from each tradition in greater depth than a single video can carry. But more important than the Patreon right now, the 6 traditions in this video are available to you. The practices are real, the protection is real, the healing is real, and the vital force that was targeted has a source that cannot be reached by anyone who cannot align with the divine order that generates it. Go to that source. Renew your connection daily. That is the practice. That is the protection. Your guides are holding the line with you. We see you. Stay lit.